So first of all, I thank Professor M.B. Agarwal sir for giving this opportunity. So I'll be quickly going through what has been spoken in EHA as far as the myeloma is concerned. Now, any virtual program, it would be as difficult to interpret the graph as this graph is. So I just tried to help you out people by concising it and by classifying it. So there were a total of 6 educational sessions on myeloma at EHA. These are the 6 sessions. There were some sponsored sessions. So there were a total of 5 sponsored sessions on myeloma at EHA. And these are the ones with respective times and dates. Now, e-posters, there were 1,374 e-posters, out of which from India we had 45. And total on myeloma were 126 out of 1,374, which was around 10%. And from India we had 7. So these are the ones from India we had 8 actually. And these are the ones which were presented from India as far as myeloma at EHA was concerned. Now, coming to relapse refractory myeloma, total there were 51 out of 126. Around 50% of the myeloma e-posters were referring to relapse refractory myeloma. So I tried to put in whatever are the important ones out of these in the next few slides for the ease of the viewers. So firstly, coming to the myeloma treatment paradigm, we all used to understand that induction, consolidation, maintenance. But if we see the graph further, the disease will relapse at some point or the other. So the first relapse, then the second relapse, and the time gap between every relapse keep halving by the time over 4th or 5th relapse, when the disease tumor burden is so high that it becomes a refractory disease, and then we lose the patient. There are certain number of patients who might achieve clinical cure, wherein more than 10 years, these individuals never had relapse, and this constitutes a very small percentage of myeloma patients. But most of them do relapse at some point of time. Now, if we look at the development of resistance, now this graph by Dr. Shaji Kumar clearly shows that as the number of treatment cycles increase, the treatment types of regimens and the duration of therapy increases, so the resistance keeps increasing for a period of time. Now, the current talk, I'll put it into 2 things. At EHA, what were the things which were spoken which we never knew, and what were the things which we already knew, and there are updates on that. So what we never knew were these newer molecules which were spoken about, of which the BCMA-directed therapies, Dr. Sharad Damodar would be talking at the flag end of this particular symposia. I will be concentrating primarily on non-BCMA-directed therapies. So there were talks on anti-CD38 molecule, newer molecules, venetoclax, Selmods, and melflufen. So firstly, coming to the anti-CD38 molecule, so this was presented by Dr. Amrita Krishnan as e-poster in 931. So this is mezagitamab. This is a newer anti-CD38 molecule which is undergoing phase 1 and phase 2 trials currently. So she has shown phase 1B data, wherein she has shown that in a dose escalating fashion, 600 mg had a good progression-free survival. And particularly in those patients who were DARA naive, this molecule had a better PFS when compared to who were already. Now, if you look at the summary of results presented by Dr. Amrita Krishnan, so in phase 2, the dose which was decided for the phase 2, so in the patients who were evaluable in 17, the response was around 24%. And in those patients who were anti-CD38 naive, the response was around 36%. The second group of drugs which was spoken about was BCL2 inhibitors. So venetoclax, we all understand, and in fact, Dr. M.B. Agarwal had done a recent symposium on venetoclax in various hematological disorders, wherein we spoke about phase 1 and phase 2 trials, and Dr. Vikram Matthews had spoken about all the phase 1 and phase 2 trials in that particular thing. But in this EHA, Dr. Shaji Kumar came up with the updated results of Bellini, which is a phase 3 venetoclax trial. So wherein venetoclax was combined with BOTI plus dexamethasone. So venetoclax plus VD versus placebo plus VD. If you look at the progression-free survival, the green curve, it shows a beautiful response when compared to placebo arm. And the reduction in the hazard ratio was 0.6 with a significant p-value. But if you look at the overall survival, it was poorer in the venetoclax arm when compared to the placebo, because there were around 12 deaths in the venetoclax arm versus the placebo arm, and mostly they were related to infection. So it shows that in the phase 3 trial, the venetoclax had higher infection-related mortality. This is the efficacy. So I showed that it was statistically significant, whereas overall survival was inferior, though this was not statistically significant. The p-value was 0.112. The next group of drugs was CELMoDs. This was spoken by Paul Richardson, wherein CELMoDs stand for cereblon E3 ligase modulators, which are the ones which are the, you can say, the elder brother of lenalidomide and pomalidomide. And they basically try to increase the apoptosis by activating the ILOS and the Ikaros pathways. And these particular CELMoDs are very effective in those patients who are already resistant to IMiDs, that is lenalidomide and pomalidomide. And they have shown synergy with dexamethasone, bortezomib, and monoclonal antibodies. So in this particular study, they have shown that the overall response rate was 21% in triple resistant group of patients, triple refractory, wherein more than 2 IMiDs or 1 PI and 1 DARA. So DARA resistant, BOTI resistant, and IMiD resistant patients, the overall response rate was 21%. But if you look at increasing dose, that is, if you give the same drug for 21 out of 28 days, then the overall response rate was 54%. So this drug might be an important drug in the future if this shows a similar benefit in the phase 2 and phase 3 trials. This is a swimmer's plot. If you see, except 3 patients, most of them are doing well in this group of patients. And it also showed that if you see the top PET scan, there was a huge extramedullary lesion here. The extramedullary lesion disappeared by putting these patients on CELMoDs. And if you look at 21 out of 28 days regimen, which is the bottom part of the graph, the swimmer's plot, the response was much better when compared to 10 out of 14 days regimen. The second CELMoD which was spoken about was iberdomide. This is another drug, same mechanism of action. It also has shown preclinical synergism with bortezomib and daratumumab by inducing NK cell proliferation and may rescue NK cell depletion by daratumumab. So by giving these particular drug in combination with DARA, there might be a greater synergism. In this particular trial, when iberdomide was given along with dexamethasone, there was an overall response rate of around 32%. And if it was given in those patients who are refractory to daratumumab and pomalidomide, the overall response rate was 29%. So again, this might be another drug which might be beneficial in particularly those patients who are already resistant to IMiDs and to bortezomib. Now, the fourth group of drugs would be melflufen. So this is something like repackaging of the old drug. We all have been using melphalan for ages together. Now, melflufen, these are the various abstracts of melflufen, out of which I've taken Horizon trial because that is one of those trials which has actually gone to a very advanced stage. So melflufen is an oncopeptide, wherein the novel drug is combined with a peptide conjugate. Thus, it is taken up rapidly by the plasma cells because of the high lipophilicity. And thereafter, inside the cell, the melphalan goes and damages the DNA. So rather than having a across-the-board effect of melphalan, particularly as we see in transplant patients, wherein by giving melphalan, we will lead to mucositis and various other complications, the renal complications and the cardiac complications of melphalan, because here we are trying to target specifically and allow the drug to specifically go to the plasma cells, the side effects, the collateral damage would be very less, and the schedule is IV once every 28 days. Now, this is a Horizon study which was presented by Matthias, and they have shown an overall response rate in an intention to treat trial of 28%, and in double class refractory, 55% of the overall response rate. And in those patients who are refractory to anti-CD that is daratumumab, a 22% overall response rate, and triple class refractory, 20% overall response rate. So this is another drug which might come up in the future, particularly for those patients who are refractory to daratumumab and to bortezomib. So, but before we go to the further part of the talk, I would like to tell all the students who are particularly listening to this particular presentation, whenever we present anything, any highlights of any of the international conferences, don't just get carried away because most of them are phase 1 and phase 2 trials. And actually, we have to wait for the phase 3 trials to look at the final benefit of these particular drugs. So this, you should take it only as recent advances and just understand that these are the molecules which are in the pipeline. Some of them may see the light of the day, some of them may not. But don't go with the impression by looking at these graphs that these are going to be used from tomorrow's date in various institutes across the country. So this just remains to be recent advances. So keep it only to that much. Now, the second part of the talk would be what we already know. And just to reiterate few things wherein they have presented various data of various trials, the updated data. So firstly, about the data on patients who are not refractory to bortezomib. So Castor, Endure, Panorama, and Eloquent. These are the four major trials about the patients who are resistant to other drugs other than PI. That means they are not resistant to bortezomib. So you can use any boti-related combinations, either with pomalidomide or with daratumumab or with elotuzumab. Of these, all these things, the latest which was presented both in ASCO as well as in EHA was the combination of selinexor with bortezomib and dexamethasone, and it has shown a median PFS benefit which was statistically significant when compared to just using bortezomib and dexa. The second thing is not refractory to lenalidomide. Now, generally, every time we used to present as refractory to len, refractory to boti, but somehow EHA this time, the various presentations were not refractory to boti, not refractory to lenalidomide. It was the other way around. So the four major trials, Tourmaline, the Eloquent, Aspire, and Pollux, have shown combination of lenalidomide with various other drugs, which could be carfilzomib, daratumumab, elotumumab, or ixazomib. So if you look at all these trials, the hazard ratio has come down by using a len-based along with one novel agent. So the basic concept remains to be combine lenalidomide in those patients who are not resistant to lenalidomide with one other novel agent which was never tried before. The next was refractory to lenalidomide and bortezomib. In this, there are the various trials which have been done of using pomalidomide for salvaging patients who are refractory, double refractory to both bortezomib as well as to lenalidomide in combination with one novel agent. Of this, the latest one, which was presented actually even in the last year EHA and even this year EHA, is the phase 3 optimism. And this time they have presented the updated analysis, and it shows that at 3 years, the benefit of combining pomalidomide with bortezomib and dexa versus boti-dexa continues. The same was also presented last year. So they just showed that by extending the study for one more year, the benefit remains and there was no drop in the benefit. The other studies which were presented were carfilzomib pomalidomide dexa, daratumumab pomalidomide dexa, and phase 2 trial of darapom-dex, and phase 3 Icaria trial, where isatuximab along with POM-dex. So all of them have shown that combining novel agents to POM-dex backbone has been beneficial rather than just giving POM-dex in those patients who are double refractory to bortezomib and lenalidomide. I'll quickly skip through slides for the want of time. Lastly, coming to refractory to len, boti, and dara. So those patients who are triple refractory. So what are the options in those particular group of patients other than the newer agents or recruiting them to the clinical trials? So use of selinexor, the STORM trial, the phase 2b study, wherein they have combined selinexor with dexamethasone, has shown that there is a significant ORR of around 26% in patients who are triple refractory. So selinexor is one of those agents which is going into phase 3 trials now in triple class refractory multiple myeloma patients. The other trial of selinexor combination with carfilzomib is a STORM trial, again, which also shown has a ORR of around 70% in those patients who are triple refractory. Combination of panabinostat. This is one of those drugs which actually came and then people forgot about it. But a combination of panabinostat with carfilzomib and dexa shows that in triple refractory patients, even this particular thing can have some benefit in this particular group of patients. So this is what we are looking at. Now, the age-old therapy of VTD PACE. This is one thing which I found very, very interesting. This was actually first published in American Journal of Hematology, and thereafter, this time in the EHA, they have presented the updated analysis. So VTD PACE remains to be a good drug, particularly for those patients who are resistant even to daratumumab. So VTD PACE, which used to be an age-old regimen, still carries a weightage in particularly in triple refractory patients. Now, the other general concepts which were spoken to, I will not go into great details, but this most of us know. So when should we start treatment for patients is particularly when there is a clinical progression or CRAP. Those with biochemical progression only may not need immediate therapy. So a presence of clinical features is very important in labeling a patient as relapsed. And treatment is indicated in high-risk disease presentation with renal or neurological complications or doubling of M spike when we are only taking a biochemical progression as a marker. So under these three conditions, even a biochemical progression can be treated. The general principles are supposed to be 2 active classes of therapy with dexamethasone is preferred over doublet. And we should always consider performance status, age, and the comorbidities when selecting the drugs and doses. How do we select treatment? So prior drug exposure, toxicity, age, frailty, and comorbidity, patient preference, which remains very, very crucial, logistics, high risk versus standard risk, and transplant eligibility. The last point is very important because in India, many patients relapse before even they would have been given the benefit of first transplant. So transplant for those patients who have not yet received the benefit of it even once should be considered. The risk stratification would be based on RISS, the genetic makeup. So we should always do a repeat genetic analysis for the patient when they relapse. What should we do for high risk? So multi-drug combinations, as I have shown you. So MRD negativity does have a benefit in better outcomes for these patients. These are the proposed drug dosings for frailty or risk score. I've just put this slide for those people who are interested to read it on a later date. So depending upon the frailty index, you can actually dose the drugs, various drugs into various combinations. The impact of toxicity is very important. So if a patient has any of these side effects, so you should try to avoid the drugs which I have pointed out in the subclassification. As I told you, patient preferences and logistics are very, very important. If a patient prefers only oral regimen, then we should give it accordingly. If a patient is not able to visit the hospital frequently, we should cater for that. IV infusions generally require in-hospital admissions or daycare admissions. That should be taken care of. And combination with less hematological toxicity will allow for less frequent testing and clinical visits. So these are important in Indian scenario. So I would end my talk with this particular slide, and just by concluding that therapeutic advances have led to prolonged survival in multiple myeloma, but it still remains to be a chronic disease. Treatment of myeloma requires a long-term strategy. Key is delivering the best package of treatment at a given stage. Optimal combination and sequencing is the key. Risk stratified approach in clinic is very important, and future will be in developing more individualized approaches. Now, one important thing for the students is there is nothing known as one regimen better than the other regimen, and no trying to compare one clinician with another clinician saying that this clinician started this regimen before the other regimen, because it's a marathon. So it really does not matter how you start off, whether you run the first 100 meters faster or the middle 100 meters or the last 100 meters. The aim is we should win the marathon, not about individual sprints, which are parts of this marathon. So don't try to compare regimens or compare clinicians based on regimens, what approach and what the type of regimen which the particular clinician has chosen, because every clinician would try to give the best to his patient. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uday. So we have some questions for you. A question is there a difference between TP53 mutation and deletion?
Yes, there is definitely a difference, because a mutation, if there is a deletion that has got a poorer prognosis when compared to a mutation, these are totally two different things. One is 17q deletion, we call it, and second is TP53 mutation. So we cannot be using the word TP53 deletion. So it is 17q deletion versus TP53. Yeah, they are different in myeloma. They carry different prognosis.
Thank you. The other question is, when a patient is on 3 drugs, like a proteasome inhibitor, an IMID, and steroid, and he becomes resistant, how do you know he's resistant to which drug?
So if a particular patient has been given the benefit of 2 drugs or 3 drugs in their full prescribed doses, because before calling a resistance of any particular drug, the most important fact is, in India particularly, we try to give suboptimal dosing, trying to suit for the frailty, for the performance status, for the economic reasons and other things. If we are sure about all these factors have been taken care of and the patient has been given the ideal doses, then if a patient has relapsed, let's take on bortezomib and lenalidomide and dexamethasone, would be considered double resistant both to boti and len, because he has already received the ideal dosing of both the drugs.
Thank you, Uday. So in the form of venetoclax, we have the first targeted therapy in myeloma. So in BELLINI trial, was it only for patients who had translocation 11-14, or it was not important to have this translocation when you used venetoclax?
So that was a wonderful question, sir, because Dr. Shaji had presented two e-posters. I have only shown the Bellini trial. So in the Bellini phase 3 trial, they have done it across the board, irrespective of the translocation. And if we look at the e-poster, so he has given for various cytogenetic abnormalities, how the PFS and the OS has differed. Whereas a separate e-poster has shown that of all the cytogenetic abnormalities, the one who have translocation 11-14 are the one which have the best prognosis when compared to other cytogenetic abnormalities. So it can be used across board, but the best benefit is those patients who have 11-14.
So Uday, there was some high mortality in the arm containing venetoclax that was restricted to the patients who did not have 11-14 translocation?
No, sir. That was in the updated Bellini, that was across board, wherein the infection-related mortality was higher, but it was not statistically significant. The difference was not statistically significant.
About selinexor, could you just tell them about the mechanism of action?
So it is a transporter inhibitor. So what it basically helps is to help any of these drugs, that is particularly when we give in combination with bortezomib, it helps in preventing the transportation of that particular element, and that helps in benefiting these patients.
Right. There's a question about carfilzomib dose schedule. So what is the most popular schedule now during induction? And after the induction consolidation is over, what is the schedule for maintenance?
So the ideal schedule still, as far as the studies are concerned, is supposed to be giving it twice a weekly dosage as per the recommended dosing. But because of economic reasons and the type of the vial strength that we receive, most of the people have been using it as once a week. Now, the various important trials which have shown it only with twice weekly dosing, not with once weekly dosing. But there are few phase 2 and phase 3 trials which are coming up with the new dosing schedule. So officially or formally, we cannot comment about it still. But as far as maintenance is concerned, yes, every 15 days during maintenance is become a norm, because there are few studies which have come upon by using KRD versus RD, wherein they have shown by using once in every 15 days, the response remains to be the same as far as carfilzomib maintenance, the progression-free survival is concerned.
Thank you. So those were the questions asked by Dr. Gunveer, Dr. Mohiuddin Khan, and Dr. Roshni Pandey to Dr. Uday. Just before we close this session, I would like to just bring out one very controversial data that was presented in this meeting, and that was from endurance trial. This was a trial which was long awaited. Work was going on for many, many years, and Shaji Kumar presented this, and this is carfilzomib, len, dexamethasone versus bortezomib, len, and dexamethasone. Now, everyone thought that carfilzomib arm will be something superior, and in general, if you've got a high-risk myeloma, you will like to use, this is upfront data, like to use carfilzomib based data, based protocol upfront. And every year one would wait for the results to come out, results to come out, results to come out. Finally, the results came out almost after 10 years in this meeting. And to everybody's surprise, KRD was not superior to VRD. The progression-free survival was identical of VRD and KRD. So there was a sort of eye-opener that anything which looks pretty good does not necessarily stand the test of time when you have got the phase 3 controlled trial in 2 arms. So you should be very careful in using a drug which is more potent. Just because it is more potent, it is going to be more useful in a patient who's got a high-risk disease is not really right. So with that, we will close this second talk, and we will go to the second MCQ. And there is a request from the organizers. And that request is that for voting, you have to click on the live poll button on the top. So unless you click on the live poll, you will not be registered. You do not get your voting registered. Okay, so just take care of that. And now we have the second question of the quiz. So this is the second question. As you know that we are discussing Hodgkin lymphoma as far as today is concerned for the MCQ. So this is second MCQ. Pick up the false statement regarding PET scan in classical Hodgkin lymphoma. So we're talking about classical Hodgkin lymphoma, PET scan, 4 statements, 3 correct, 1 wrong. After I read this out, you'll have 20 seconds. So best timings of the PET scan in classical Hodgkin lymphoma are baseline, interim PET scan after 2 cycles, and end of treatment scan done 6 to 8 weeks post chemotherapy. So 3 PET scans at the diagnosis after 2 cycles and 6 to 8 weeks after the chemotherapy is over is the first statement. Second statement, PET scans with Deauville score of 0 to 3 are concluded as negative scan. That means that the patient has no active disease. He is in remission. C, once the PET scan is done, bone marrow biopsy can be skipped, meaning by if you've done a PET scan, you need not do the bone marrow biopsy. And last, if PET scan is not available, whole body low dose CT scan is a reasonable replacement. Many parts of India, because of various reasons, availability or cost, you may not have PET scan available. So the statement is, if that is not available, a whole body low dose CT scan is a reasonable replacement for PET scan. So this is for classical Hodgkin lymphoma. Your time starts now. So in a couple of moments, we will have your results displayed. So the results are here. 42% of you have voted for the option 4 being the wrong one. That means CT scan low dose is not a replacement for PET, and you are absolutely right. That was a wrong statement. Some of you felt that doing a bone marrow biopsy cannot be skipped if you have done the PET scan, but that is not true. PET scan tells you quite effectively and accurately about bone marrow involvement or otherwise. So in general, today bone marrow biopsy is skipped if you have done a PET scan and if it tells you yes or no about the marrow. And Deauville score, of course, 0 to 3 are negative, 4 and 5 are positive. That means there is a residual active disease, metabolically active disease, if it is 4 and 5. And this first statement was absolutely perfect. In all classical Hodgkin lymphoma, you need 3 PET scans. At diagnosis, interim PET scan at the end of 2 cycles, actually just before the 3rd cycle, at least 10 days after the 2nd cycle, and 6 to 8 weeks after the end of the chemotherapy for full after the chemotherapy to be over and the results to be seen. This is extremely important, especially the interim PET scan, to know whether your treatment can be de-escalated or it has to be increased. So if you are giving ABVD, whether you have to go to escalated VIACOP. If you are giving ABVD, whether you can drop Leo and go to AVD. So that all is decided by this interim PET scan. This is very, very important for all the students to understand. So that was our second quiz. Is Uday there? Or Uday has logged out?
Yes, sir.
Uday, we have some questions for you. Okay? Okay. So I'll put the questions to you now. Do we need to change the treatment if serum protein electrophoresis shows a spike of 3 grams? I suppose what he says is that you have treated the patient and there is still a spike of 3 grams.
Sir, as far as the previous guidelines were concerned, a cutoff of 3 grams was considered as one of the criteria for treating relapsed refractory myeloma. But nowadays, a rapid doubling of the serum protein electrophoresis is considered as long as the SPP is more than 1 gram per deciliter. So the current guidelines, the latest by Vincent Rajkumar, speaks of doubling more than 1 gram as a criteria for biochemical progression to be treated in the absence of clinical markers.
There's one more question for you. How will you treat a patient on KRD who has not responded despite 4 cycles? That means 4 cycles of KRD, no response. How will you manage this patient?
4 cycles is, if at all, if it is upfront therapy, 4 cycles is too less. Even if a patient has achieved a VGPR, in that particular given situation, a transplant would be the scenario. But perhaps refractory setting, anything more than 3 cycles, personally, I would like to change it to any other drug. I would like to give a DARA-based therapy. But in this case, you would be the best judge to give the opinion. How would you go about it?
You are absolutely right, because once you have used LEN and Carfil, so you do not have a PI left with you. So POM plus DARA and dexamethasone is always there, will be a reasonably good combination, as you mentioned. It's a very interesting question. In a high-risk myeloma, which both of you, and maybe both of you can answer, Samir as well as Uday. In a high-risk myeloma, what will be the maintenance protocol? First, Uday.
Sir, on today's date, the data, as you just brought out of the endurance trial, so the data really does not show a benefit. Previously, people used to say in the based on phase 2 trial that carfilzomib maintenance would be better. But now even a LEN maintenance or a LENDEX maintenance in these individuals, high-risk myeloma patients, till the time they progress would be a good choice. Unless until the patient has got 14-16 translocation, wherein we would like to choose a bortezomib-based therapy. Samir, sir, your opinion?
Yeah. So, in the lecture that I was listening to by Dr. San Miguel, he was commenting about using both a PI and lenalidomide as maintenance. Once you get into a good remission, in these patients, if you've had a good response, say if you've given VRD as the initial induction therapy and then you've gone for an autologous transplant, then you may decide to use either bortezomib plus lenalidomide maintenance, or in a high-risk patient, at least a PI maintenance until relapse.
So, right. I mean, what we are doing in the practice is exactly this, that we are going with 2 drugs. And most of the patients have received a PI and an IMID, so we continue with PI and IMID. And of late, as we are having patients who are upfront receiving DARA, then we are continuing monthly DARA with LEN. So DARA, LEN, or Velcade, LEN, or Carfil, LEN have become the maintenance therapy. Of course, the distancing becomes the bortezomib given once in 2 weeks, Carfil given once in 2 weeks, DARA given once in a month, all that happens. So the intensity of the treatment is much less, but yes, 2 drugs continue. Recently, there was some data, not in EHA, but published data, that go with MRD. So if the patient is MRD negative, then your maintenance therapy may not be that strong. And all those patients who are MRD positive, your maintenance therapy has to be strong. Talking about the side